So I'm Luke Mahaffey, and the artist I've chosen to do for my presentation is Pablo Picasso. So Pablo Picasso was a Spanish painter, sculptor, ceramicist, printmaker, etching artist, and writer. He's most well known as a painter, though. He was one of the greatest and most influential artists of the 20th century. He is the co-creator of Cubism, which most people associate him with. He also invented collage and made major contributions to surrealism and symbolism. Picasso was born in 1881 in Malaga, Spain. Interestingly, his birth name was 23 words long: Pablo Diego Jose Francisco de Paulo Juan Nepomuceno Maria de los Remedios Cipriano de la Santísimo Trinidad Martyr Patricio Clito Ruiz y Picasso. So it's pretty obvious why I only went by Pablo Picasso. His father was also an artist. He taught art classes and curated at the local museum. Picasso was not a very good student, but was very gifted at drawing from a young age. According to his mother, his first word was lápiz, the Spanish word for pencil. His father started teaching Pablo drawing and oil painting when he was 7, and he was shown to be a very promising student. By the time he was 13 years old, his skill level had surpassed his father's. After the death of his 7-year-old sister, the family moved to Barcelona, where his father took a teaching position at its School of Fine Arts. After some persuasion to the officials at the academy, they allowed Pablo to take an entrance exam for the advanced level class. Most students took a month to finish this entrance exam, but Picasso finished it in only a week, leading to his admission at just age 13. Picasso lacked discipline at the School of Fine Arts, disliking the strict rules and formalities, so he began skipping class so he could roam Barcelona and sketch different parts of the city. In 1897, when Picasso was 16, he was sent to Madrid to attend Spain's best art academy at the time, which was the Royal Academy of San Fernando. He again became frustrated with the school's singular focus on classical techniques and subjects, so once again he began skipping class. He preferred to roam the art exhibits at the Prado, studying works by El Greco, Francisco Goya, and Diego Velázquez. The body of work Picasso made in his lifetime is massive and spans from when he was a child until his death, creating a very comprehensive record of his art development. The official beginning of his career has been dated at 1894, when he was just 13, it said to be a shift where the childlike quality of his art disappears. Most people associate Picasso with his Cubist art, and when looking at some of his pieces, you might think, oh hey, I could do that. What's the big deal? It looks basic. But in reality, he was a master of many different art styles. For example, in his painting Portrait of Aunt Pepa, which has been referred to as one of the greatest portraits in Spanish history, he made this at the age of 14. At age 16, he created the award-winning Science and Charity, which is the one on the right. At age 16 he made the award-winning Science and Charity. He also made the First Communion portrait he made of his sister, which is on the left. He made that at age 14. So, with these examples, it's evident that he was capable of creating realistic paintings. He just grew bored of these classical techniques that were ingrained in him from his father and his studies. Picasso's technique for realism started to evolve at the end of the 19th century because of his introduction to symbolist influences. He started to develop his own interpretation of modernism, which became apparent in his stylized landscape paintings. This led Picasso to take his first trip to Paris, the art capital of Europe, in 1900. In Paris, he met a friend named Max Jacob, a poet and journalist who helped Picasso learn French. They soon shared an apartment where they both literally learned what it means to be a starving artist. Picasso was very poor, cold, and desperate at this time in his life. Apparently they would burn their own artwork to keep the apartment warm. Picasso soon moved to Madrid, where he lived for the first part of 1901. Here, he and his anarchist friend, Francisco Assis Soler, founded a magazine called Young Art, where they illustrated art, most of which were cartoons sympathizing with the poor. By the time of the first issue was released, he had begun to sign his work Picasso rather than Pablo Ruiz y Picasso. Picasso would predominantly spend the rest of his working adult life in France. Art historians and critics typically divide Picasso's adult career into distinct periods. Each of these different periods of time, he would develop complex themes and moods, which would create a unifying body of work. So the first art period of Picasso's adult career is known as the Blue Period, which includes his art from 1901 to 1904. During this time, Picasso mostly painted in shades of blue, sometimes including touches of accent color. So the first piece I'm going to talk about is a great example of his Blue Period art, The Old Guitarist. This was painted in 1903. His works from the Blue Period are often seen as somber because of their subdued tones. These gloomy paintings were inspired by Spain, but painted when he was living in Paris. The subject matter of the works in this period often include beggars, drunks, prostitutes, and poverty. The starting point of this period is thought to be after the suicide of his friend, Carlos Casamagas. This event put Picasso in a depressed and desolate state. In addition, he was also very poor at the time, making him sympathize and relate to the beggars and other outcasts in society. Also, earlier when we talked about how poor he was when living in Madrid, that also added to his sympathy for the poor. The Old Guitarist was painted just after his friend's suicide. This work was made in Madrid, and the distorted figure is reminiscent of work by El Greco, an inspiration of his when he was attending school in Madrid. Elements of the painting were specifically chosen to create a reaction from the viewer. The monochromatic color scheme creates a flat, two-dimensional form that separate the guitarist from time and space. Scale is manipulated, making elongated proportions, which intensifies the man's silent composition. It depicts an old, bent, and blind man playing a large round guitar. Notice how the brown of the guitar in the paintings only shift in color from, is the only paintings shift in color throughout the whole piece. The guitar, both physically and symbolically, fills the space around the figure, who seems oblivious to his blindness and poverty as he plays. The brown tone of the guitar represents the spark of joy the instrument brings the man, momentarily distracting him from his miserable state. The guitar can also represent his hope for survival. He is dependent on the small income he can earn from playing his music on the streets for change. It is thought that this painting expresses the solitary life of an artist and the struggles that go along with it. Yet despite the isolation, the artist depends on the rest of society for survival. So I'll skip over the period following the Blue Period, which was the Rose Period that lasted from 1904 to 1906. It was named because of the use of warmer pink and rose colors and often less melancholy subject matter than the Blue Period paintings were. So the next painting I'll talk about is one of Picasso's most famous, Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, painted in 1907. This was made during his African influence period, which lasted from 1907 to 1909. The pieces made in this time were inspired by angular African art Picasso had been interested in recently, and by an African mask that Henri Matisse owned. This is also the most famous example of Cubism. He abandoned all known representation and form of traditional art. He distorts the female body in geometric forms in an innovative way, which challenged the traditional idealized representations of female beauty in more classical works. Originally, Picasso referred to it as Le Bordel d'Avignon, meaning the brothel of Avignon. But the art critic who managed its first exhibition renamed it Les Demoiselles d'Avignon because when it was first exhibited, it was seen as outrageous and immoral. Picasso prepared for over 6 months for the final painting, making hundreds of sketches, drawings, and paintings before the final one. The painting depicts 5 naked women with figures composed of flat planes and faces of which were inspired by African sculpture and masks. The 5 ladies in the painting seem to be detached and unconscious of each other. Each figure seems to only focus on the viewer. This is thought to be a representation of a self-possessed woman who is no longer there solely for the pleasure of male gaze. The women all appear to slightly be menacing as well. Also notice that each figure is drawn in different styles from each other. The viewer, instead of observing a room of prostitutes, is targeted from all sides by their gaze. I'm not going to talk much more about this painting since we covered it in class previously. And for the last piece I didn't want to pick any others by Picasso that we covered in class, like Guernica or A Girl Before a Mirror. So for the next piece, I've chosen 3 musicians, which was painted in 1921. This piece is a part of his synthetic Cubism period. As I mentioned earlier, Picasso was the co-pioneer of Cubism, along with Georges Braque. Cubism is an early 20th century art movement in which the subject is depicted from multiple viewpoints, all on one plane. Synthetic Cubism was the second phase of this movement, which was characterized because of its increased use of color, more basic lines and shapes, and sometimes collage. So 3 Musicians is a prime example of synthetic Cubism. The painting is very colorful and has the appearance of cut paper. Everything in the painting is made up of flat shapes. In the painting we can see a harlequin, a pierrot, and a monk, all playing instruments. The harlequin is a mute character, usually masked and dressed in jester garb. Pierrot is a French pantomime with a sad white face and a pointed hat. So the harlequin, the pierrot, and the monk are generally believed to be Picasso, his friends, Guillaume Apollinaire, who died a couple years prior, and Max Jacob, the poet friend I talked about earlier that he lived with, who entered a monastery in 1921, so that's why he's being depicted as a monk. The table in front has a pipe and other objects on it. Behind there is a dog on the ground. The square room makes the painting seem as a boxy brown stage on which 3 musicians perform to the viewer. The framing of the picture is odd. The floor and the walls don't line up with each other on either side of the room, making the room seem lopsided, but the musicians are steady in the front, so it doesn't line up there with over there. It shows all the musicians all working together, playing in harmony. It's hard to tell where one musician starts and another stops because all the shapes seem to intersect and overlap and blend with one another. Picasso said he was delighted when Gertrude Stein joyfully announced that she had at last understood what the 3 musicians was meant to be. It was a still life. So, to art historians, 3 musicians may be seen as Picasso's belated reply to the piano lesson by Henri Matisse, which is another painting we talked about in class. So in conclusion, the reason I chose to do my presentation on Pablo Picasso is because I've always found his work interesting and unique. I didn't know a whole lot about him before researching for this, and it surprised me how vast his skill set was when it came to painting and all forms of artwork in general. He lived a long life and was able to master many different art forms. Picasso was one of the most innovative and important artists of the 20th century, and it was fascinating learning so much about his life.